Hello.
Yeah, I guess we just kick off on time, don't we?
Oh, lots of people arriving.
Okay.
Excellent. So hi, for all of you that are arriving, welcome. We're just going to let a few more people come in. Everyone's audio is turned off apart from the speakers. You may or may not be pleased to hear. We're doing that because we just would like to have the conversation in the chat box. So hopefully everyone is able to find that. So it looks like people are arriving, and say hi. Just say hi and tell us where in the world you are. I'm in Bath in the southwest, by the way, and my name's Martin. I'm the person that put that first chat message in, and I'll be your host tonight. So welcome everyone. Manchester, South London, South Wales, the Northwest, Northeast, unable to hear. So Inverness, welcome all. Aviemore, we really are touching all corners of the UK tonight. That's fantastic. Leeds, Portsmouth, Wolverhampton. We really have got this covered, haven't we? Cornwall. Oh, Steve, I hope it's not too wet where you are. Hertfordshire, welcome. Judy. Now, we're going to get going in a minute. Kent, Totnes. Wow. So who gets the prize for the furthest away? I think we've got Inverness there, haven't we? So if you can't hear, because someone has said they're unable to hear anything, so that could be to do with the microphone. There's a microphone icon in the bar that hopefully you can see. But please do message me again if that's a problem. Great. So thank you for introducing yourselves. I think we're going to get started actually. So we're all here tonight to look at the Youth Music Quality Framework in Disabled Young People. We've got 1 hour, and I'm going to be your host. I'm Martin Cousins, and I'm not going to do an awful lot of talking, but I am going to try and keep things to time because I know that our two superstar guests have a lot to say, and we could be here for a lot longer than an hour, I'm sure, because there's so much interesting stuff in this framework. So I'm just going to let you see here that we've got the chat box. So we get the kind of the rules, or the way we're going to roll this tonight is to use the chat for conversation and questions. And if anyone needs captions, there is a closed caption. There should be a closed caption option in your bar. I hope you can see that. And we'll be putting some captions in there too. Inverness is the furthest away. So congratulations, Emily. So our speakers this evening, we are very lucky to have Matt Griffiths, the CEO of Youth Music, and Jonathan Westrup, the Education Manager at Drake Music. These are the two people that really know this framework inside out. And I'm going to be your host for this evening, as I've already said. So I just want to, hopefully you can see that. Tonight we're going to cover 4 things. We're going to learn a bit more about the quality framework. We're going to discuss how it can be used in practice and how that can fit into your practice, and share some examples of it in action. The session is going to be 2 short talks from Matt and Jonathan. We're going to have a couple of questions after Matt's talk, and then we're going to have a lot more questions and discussion at the end of Jonathan's. If you fancy tweeting, then please feel free. That's our hashtag, Think2010. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Matt.
Thank you, Martin, and a warm welcome to you all. We're really delighted to be part of this important webinar this evening. I'm joined from Music by Nick Wilston, our Research and Evaluation Manager. Many of you will probably know Nick. And it's great to see that, scrolling down, we can see so many teachers, music leaders and organisations have signed up to be part of this. It's a really good sign for us, and hopefully this will be the first of many. So in terms of youth music, just to set the scene, a national charity, our national focus is on children and young people in challenging circumstances, making sure that they can regularly have the opportunity to make music. Our network of projects that we support across the country stands at just over 350, reaching over 75,000 children and young people every year who are regularly making music. Just to give a little bit of context as to why this is really important to us, our business plan for 2016 to 2020, it's called Towards a Musically Inclusive England, which is really our big goal. And within that, there's 3 interrelated components. Young people can progress and overcome the barriers they face. Secondly, the workforce is suitably skilled to enable them to do so. And thirdly, the diversity of music is celebrated and explored. So in terms of the workforce, this is really relevant to this evening's webinar. And actually a suitably skilled workforce is for us really key to getting this right, i.e. achieving a musically inclusive England. We're an evidence-based charity and actively encourage the projects we support and others to be the same in terms of what they do, and the actions that they take as organisations clearly being defined by need. So how do you know what's needed, which then informs what you do? As a lot of you will probably know, we developed a national outcomes approach which sits within our grants and learning cycle, and you can see the picture on the screen. Just in terms of the quality framework, we published it in 2013 and actively encourage its adoption by the projects we support and indeed other projects. And it really started a bit earlier than that in 2011 when we commissioned the Institute of Education to do some research which we called Communities of Music Education. And that research looked at the characteristics evident in music making projects for young people, particularly young people within community settings. So what we have and what we published in 2013 is a quality framework which is really designed to be a reflective learning resource for practitioners working in music education to help reflect and evaluate their practice. It's not a tick box exercise, it's actually a learning resource for practitioners in terms of their evaluation of their own practice. And 3 years in, it's now been adopted by many organisations that we support and indeed we don't support. And it's being tailored very much to their own organisational needs in terms of the young people they're working with. As you'll know, it's in 4 areas with 23 criteria in total, but I'll just focus on the 4 areas. Firstly, young people centred. Secondly, session content. Thirdly, environment. And lastly, music leader practice. And hopefully you're already familiar with it or have been able to read it before this evening's session. And we're delighted, it was really a great positive step that Drake Music adopted this and indeed took our framework further by grasping the nettle to create a tailored version specifically for work in SEND settings, working with disabled children. And on the slides, you'll have seen examples of areas 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4. One example on the pro forma, which you'll see is the young people centred pro forma. To give you some ideas that we're thinking about there, one of the questions and one of the things to discuss is recognising the young musician's existing passion for and interest in music. So how is that allowed for in the session that the music leader runs? And secondly, in terms of young people centred again, differentiated activities. So each individual musician, each individual young musician in the session feels included and valued. So I think it's important to say from 2011 to 2013, it's a grassroots learning resource for the practitioner in whatever setting they're working with. And what we're really pleased about is being adopted, but it's being tailored, because it has to be tailored so it's right for you and in your individual circumstances. And we're pleased to see how it's progressed, and indeed very pleased that then Drake created their own bespoke version for work with disabled young musicians, which is obviously the focus of tonight. So essentially, that's it from me. I think we're just going to pause now, Martin, for some quick questions and perhaps a quick discussion.
So, questions. I'm just having a quick let through. Actually, at the moment we've got people. We haven't had any questions yet. So come on, everyone. There must be some things that you've got to ask Matt. Is there anything else you'd like to elaborate a bit more on, Matt? I know you've given us your pitch there in terms of youth music, but in terms of what we're talking about tonight, is there anything you'd like to just elaborate on?
I think elaborating, recognising that organisations and other organisations have developed frameworks, but I think what we hope differentiates this one is that it's really practically useful for the practitioner on a day-to-day basis. So what we've seen when it works best, it's for the individual to really evaluate quite carefully and reflect on how is the work going. And all those criteria for some settings won't be relevant, but we find that the 4 sort of topic areas are pretty relevant across all music making activities. But I think that's the thing for us. You know, you develop a framework and sometimes people go, oh, the funders developed a framework, we must all follow it. That's not really our take. Our take is actually, over all the years that the work youth music's been supported, these are some of the ingredients that we think are key, and therefore we thought it was important to write it down. Something's coming on questions, I think.
Yeah, so Dick's just saying that he's using the do, review, improve approach.
Yeah.
And that's working well. Carrie's just asking, she's saying, I'm really interested in emerging music leaders and how we can best support them develop their approaches, particularly when some settings require sensitive approaches.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's where it becomes tailored. It's not a one size fits all, but there's characteristics that I think cut across whatever the setting is. But for some of the criteria will be more relevant than others. But I think we don't envisage a situation where, you know, you're going in with a clipboard and saying, are you doing A, B, C, and D? It's more the practitioner using it to look at actually how are they doing in their work and what needs to change and adapt to suit the needs of the young musicians they're working with.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna move on. I even forgot to put the questions slide on. Yeah.
So, yeah, there is something somebody's asked. The resources on the Youth Music website.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all there.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll package that up. So we'll send that all out afterwards. So everything that we're talking about here, and also recording of tonight, that'll all be made available to everyone. So yeah, absolutely, that'll be there for you. So I'm going to hand over. We're going to come back to the questions, so keep them coming. It's great. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan now from Drake Music. Jonathan.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to start by just quickly telling you about Drake Music if you haven't come across us. Drake Music's tagline is leaders in music, disability and technology. Can you hear me all right there, Martin?
I can indeed.
That means everyone else can. Okay. We're a national charity with offices in London, Bristol and Manchester. And we've got 4 programme strands currently: learning and participation, research and development, training and consultancy, and artistic development. So that's us, and we've been doing that for over 20 years now. I'll just move along. You might have to do that for me, Martin. It's not.
I can. There you go.
There you go. You help me that. Okay. So this session tonight is I think 2020 session for Drake Music. What that means is I think 2020 is Drake Music's Youth Music Fund C initiative, and that's designed to fundamentally to increase sustainable music making opportunities for disabled young people. And we've got 3 strategic strands to this work: workforce development, practice modelling and sharing in education settings, advocacy and learning. And clearly the name Think 2020 makes it clear that, you know, we're very much thinking to the future and to what we can achieve in the same way that Matt was talking about towards a musically inclusive England. Clearly, we're also interested in the UK part, you know, the whole UK as well. But this is obviously youth music. It's an England focus in this respect. Okay, next one. So moving, thank you. So, why do we need a separate quality framework for special educational needs and/or disabled young people? I think there are 4 main reasons. Firstly, I think there's still uncertainty about what quality looks like for SEND. Much of the work that goes on is bespoke in nature, and this makes it harder to share more widely. Equally, the term SEND covers a massive spectrum of needs and approaches. So there's still a job to do there about demystifying what quality looks like. Secondly, it's a good opportunity to put good practice into action. In the same way as Sands of Intent framework, using a framework enables people to try out ideas, reflect upon them, and to plan improvements. And if a lot of people do this simultaneously, I think it starts to shift the conversations and practice across the country for the better. And then thirdly, I think the adapted framework is separate, but it is working to the same basic youth music model. This is the original one that came out 2013. There's a danger, I think, that as more organisations emerge in this area, they each produce their own frameworks, leading to potential confusion, you know, which framework is best for me. And I think by working within a single evidence-based model, I think we can achieve consistency while still meeting the different needs. And then finally, I think the framework is simply a vehicle to promote inclusive music making. Following that recent announcement of £300 million for music education over the next few years, I think there's still a lot of work to be done to change the culture in the sector when it comes to SEND music making. And we do need to continue advocating that an ongoing focus on this work is non-negotiable, and that a well-trained workforce is the key to unlocking disabled children's potential to play and compose music. Okay, we'll move on. So how have we adapted the original framework? We wanted to improve the quality of music leading in SEND settings, whilst, as I said earlier, avoiding a plethora of disability music frameworks. So we took a post-it note approach. So we added comments about specific criteria that reference real-life scenarios that you commonly would find in special schools and settings. And then for the other criteria, we felt that the existing comments that were there were already valid for both special and mainstream contexts. So in those instances, we've left them unchanged. And I think we're going to have a look at a couple of examples now, if Martin could move us. Thank you. Brilliant. So here's an example under session content. And in this example, we're highlighting the need to plan ahead when capturing young musicians' opinions who may be non-verbal and may be using a VOCA, a voice output communication aid. So there's a comment at the top with Drake music there, and then the example given to try and set a scenario up. Okay, should we move, Martin? Okay, and then another example against environment. And in this example, the focus is on the spaces that you use for music making and how the space you use can potentially cause distractions for young musicians. For example, here with autistic spectrum conditions. So there's a scenario there that some people may have come across in large, boomy spaces with poor acoustics. Okay, we'll just move on. Obviously, these are in the document, so you can look at these at your leisure. The last example is young people centered. And here we're discussing the way in which music can enable many young disabled musicians to exercise power. In this case, the power to keep a room waiting in expectant silence for them to begin playing before the rest of the group respond in kind. Okay, next slide, please. So how should you use the framework? The framework, as Matt said, it's not a kind of training program which you work through in an order, ticking the boxes. I think the best way to deliver is to do a normal session that you would do, and then I think put some time aside afterwards to talk with a colleague. I think you can agree upon the criteria you want to concentrate on, usually one at a time. You talk through your reflections on what happened in the session, using any video footage if you have it, which is an excellent way to reflect. It doesn't have to be exhaustive. I mean, I've often found 15 minutes is usually enough on a busy day to collect your thoughts. And then at the end, using the template, you can write down the key points from your conversation. What will you do differently next week? Are there specific equipment changes that you might need to make? Are you going to change the order in which you did things? All of those things are up for discussion. And then finally, I think deliver the session the following week. And as the diagram shows, and I know most people will be familiar, this is a cycle of continuing improvement. So next slide, if that's okay. And this is the last one, and then we can start discussing. So what are some of the key outcomes we're hoping for? I think we want colleagues who are working, especially in special schools, to feel supported. It's a tough time for music teachers. We know a lot about the MU campaign for working conditions, and we hear about that. And, you know, we really hope the framework will increase people's enjoyment of their work and help them to improve their practice. I also hope the framework is contributing to discussions around music and disability becoming more sophisticated. Now, by sophisticated, I mean a deeper understanding of what works. I also mean how strategic and sustainable that work will be. I think we really want to move away from projects and move towards an ongoing, much more embedded offer. I think another outcome is that the standard of delivery can become more consistent across England. I think we can hopefully spend less time reinventing wheels. If people can agree upon a standard starting point and continue to adapt it from there, as Matt said, you know, because the framework is by no means a final word. You know, in itself, it has to continue to update itself. And I know Adam Ockleford would say the same about Sounds of Intent. And finally, I think if people use the framework, we just want simply more opportunities to open up for those young musicians out there to take part. And if we have that confident workforce, sort of brimming with ideas, I think we can bring even more special schools in from the cold and fill their rooms with, you know, with orchestras, music courses, instrumental lessons, and a great deal more. That's it from me. So time for a pause and hopefully a few questions.
That's really good. Thank you, Jonathan. As you can probably see in the chat box, Jonathan and Matt, there's lots of, you know, some really interesting, there's some questions and some reflections. So I've got some questions that I've pulled out, but, you know, Matt, you've just been looking at that. What, is there anything there that you'd like to just pick up on first?
I was just looking through the questions, and they're really, really good comments and questions. I think there's something around where can this be used, and the point made, could it be used in schools, and how does it fit with the curriculum? I think what it's about, this framework is assumed that it's working in a place where there's a creative music making process going on. And in a creative music making process, there's these characteristics that make it really good. And they're the 4 areas that we set out. And in the research that drove it, it actually began to discover that the previous, I guess, descriptions of non-formal and formal music education, there were ingredients in both those worlds that had similarities more than they had differences. And what that's meant that for places that can really, you know, focus on creative music making, rather than have to follow a curriculum, you can kind of hopefully do both. So you have a creative music making process which looks at those 4 areas, and in so doing, it covers what you have to do to fulfill curriculum matters. But for us, it hasn't been the other way around, because actually our focus is around, you know, the positive outcomes that come out of creative music making, wherever that takes place. And historically for us, you know, until more recently, that was dominantly in community and out of school settings, in health settings, in youth offending settings, etc., etc. And just the last point, we're testing this now with this 4-year action research with the Exchanging Notes project that's using this framework, and it's a partnership between the in-school music teacher working for a sustained period of time alongside the music leader from a music organisation. And that's been really fascinating and indeed challenging about actually where the areas of overlap are, but also where that's quite challenging stuff for the visiting music leader to be 4 years within a school. But I think the framework enables something that says, actually, if we're going to do creative music making, I think it's agreed that these 4 areas are really important. And you kind of, you box and cox a little bit on the 23 criteria in terms of which are most relevant to your setting.
So can I just pick up, Jonathan, can I just bring you in there? Because, you know, we're talking about that in school, out of school, these two environments. So what's, you know, coming back to that question of, you know, how are people using it in the in-school setting? So what's the Drake Music experience been of that so far? Is there one? Are people doing it?
Well, the first thing to say, it's relatively quite new, the framework, but my take on it is that for Drake Music, there's two things we're excited about. First of all, we're looking at our own sort of training that we do for our people who work for Drake Music, and this is going to become a central feature of that. And then I think what that will allow is for us to then take that into the schools that we're working in. I think there is a need now to follow up on how this is actually working. And we're hoping, I know you're going to talk about this later, Martin, we're hoping to invite people back in March next year to come back and talk about what their experiences have been. Because I think that's going to be crucial about finding out how useful and illuminating the framework has been and can be. So that's my short answer. It's still quite early days, but we are very keen to track this through webinars and through these sorts of events.
And just to add in there, we've seen, in terms of schools, I guess, where it's specifically special schools, where the constraints are rightly so slightly different in terms of the curriculum has to look like this because of obviously the needs and abilities of the young people in special schools. It can work really, really well. And there are some examples now, and we've heard just now from Bristol, where it's been incorporated into their wider schools work as well, in addition to special schools. I often feel conscious of the pressure that teachers in schools are under in terms of levels and all these things that for a creative music making process strike me as a real disconnect. So we'll really keep pushing for actually the creative music making process, which in itself will fulfill curriculum needs, but not the other way around.
So just picking up on Graham's point, so he showed the form, and Graham's asking, how do you see the observation form being used as a reflective tool for music leaders, or as an evaluation tool that music leaders give to their employers? What's the? I know I'm diving quite deep down into detail with that question, but how do you see that? Because is it both, or is it one or the other?
I think Nick's been driving some of this. I think Nick's got some thoughts on that. If that's okay, Martin.
I think one of the things that's key to note is the framework's not a scored framework, and that's kind of actually a bit of a hint towards that. It's not supposed to be so much of an observational thing of actually rating performance and seeing if all your practitioners can be a 10 on the young people centered criteria and developing that. It's very much meant to be using that as a sort of self-reflection process. But it's not to say that it can't be used for peer observation. So when you've entered into that kind of dialogue with other practitioners in your organisation, or potentially other organisations, that we've seen some really good examples of different organisations sharing practice by observing each other's sessions and imparting that as feedback. So yeah, not so much giving people a score out of 10, but actually saying, well, here are the things that you're really strong at. Here's the things that you could perhaps be working on more. Great.
So Nick, just introduce yourself quickly, just in case everyone's thinking, wait a minute, who's this person that's come in stage left? Go on, introduce yourself quickly.
I'm the Learning and Evaluation Manager here at Youth Music. I haven't hijacked any feeds. I'm supposed to be here.
Excellent. So Nick and Matt are both sitting in the same room, yes. And so it's great to have you inputting at that there, Nick. Thanks very much. So look, I've got a question about leadership that's been. And this is always a big issue, I think, because, it's all about making this stuff happen. So how much does the process, now, I didn't have a name, whoever's asked this, I'm asking this on your behalf, but there was there's a kind of number, not a name. How much does the process rely on the music leader being reflective?
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah. It makes an assumption that if you're going to be a great music leader or practitioner or teacher, then by its very nature you will be reflective, to be able to sort of reflect on what you're doing and assess what you're doing, and is it suiting the needs of the learners that you're working with. So it does make that assumption, and I guess then to have the right workforce, partly back to my earlier point, a reflective workforce is part of that. So it does need that, whereby it's not a music leader or a teacher supplying an activity to a group of kids, which might be in their repertoire of activities that they roll out each week. But it asks for something that's differentiated, it's progressive, it takes account of the progress that young people are making and adjusts accordingly. And again, that's back to us, you know, thinking that a musically inclusive England requires this suitably skilled workforce. So yes, they do need to be reflective, and if that's a skill and an attribute that they're working on, you know, there'll be different levels of that. But I think you need to think a little bit before you do, you know, do review, improve. That's kind of the whole point, rather than purely supply.
Just picking up on some of the comments we've seen coming through as well, a number of people have mentioned they use this already in part of their training. And I think, you know, that's really encouraging for us to hear, because it's actually involving people and sort of nudging them towards that reflective practice at the, you know, at the very moment that they start learning about what they're doing. So it's encouraging reflective practice right from the outset, which is really positive.
Can I step in there?
Of course.
Yeah, I think I want to just say something very quickly about sustainability, because historically an issue around working in this area is that a lot of it has been project-based work, and it's fairly, now I say easy, what I mean is it's one thing to go in and do some work and you're novelty and you're new and you've got new ideas and you may do that for a number of weeks, but then imagine at the end of that project suddenly says, oh, we found some money we want you to do for the rest of the year. Now, you're going to need two things. You're going to need content, which you're going to, you know, obviously devise, as Matt said, based around the interests of the children. But you also need to sustain yourself professionally across an entire year. And I think that's what we mean about supporting people, because I think there is a bit of a, sometimes I talk to teachers who are trying to develop curriculums within their special schools that take account of progression across key stages, types of SEN, very complex. I only know a few teachers who are really, you know, I know there's lots of people out there, but a few people I can think of that are really digging down into that. And it's a slightly different experience sometimes to a community musician working freelance, where you're dropping in and out constantly and dipping in. So I think the framework is a kind of conversation with yourself to help you hang on in there and keep the level of quality up. And I think it's about sort of well-being as well, actually, because you know, it's difficult. People in this area of work are fundamentally coming up with solutions. It's very much around coming up with solutions, and I think in the same breath, I'm also keen. I see the word demystify coming up on my screen here. I think we do have a job to demystify it at the same time as saying, you know, it is skilled, but we do need to demystify it as well. I think there's too many people carrying a lot of the responsibility in hub areas where it should be spread across a wider team. And I think this framework is a great way to start that conversation.
I think, can I just pick up, I think, on what you're saying? So Rosie's is saying, you know, really useful. It's really useful for non-music specialists to see, allows more understanding of the reasons why music specialists are including the things in their sessions. So surely a point of this, or an outcome, is that people can see what happens with that reflection. Apart from the model you've described, is there not an opportunity here to be using that to show others exactly, you know, what this, you know, what practice looks like and how it's being developed? Matt.
Well, I guess that's our ambition, really, that through the Youth Music Network, through people sharing practice at various activities and gatherings of music education, that it grows, it becomes, it's not sort of the sense of being replicable, because it'll be different in different settings, but this growing of a workforce that can really kind of understand young people's views and their worldviews, their passion for music, and use that as a real opportunity to create great music with lots of young people, I think is the sort of opportunity. So what we're keen to see is how, without us dictating this is exactly how it needs to look, which is back to the tick box thing, we've created an environment whereby the workforce can rightly, you know, a professional workforce that it is, can rightly have time to reflect on what it's doing. And I also think at the same time that's a challenge to it, to the workforce as well, particularly as Jonathan mentioned, the idea of the visiting music leader who might be more used to doing their kind of repertoire that's quite fixed and they take it to various places. This is saying, no, actually, it's really differentiated for each circumstance that you're in, which might seem really obvious. So there's both an opportunity in terms of getting a consistency in the country, but also a challenge really also to raise the game and just build a closer relationship between what happens between the music leader coming from their background, working alongside the music teacher in the classroom.
Yeah. Jonathan, any thoughts?
No, I think I just agree with what Matt was saying, really, that you know those two worlds need to understand each other better, and that's what Exchanging Notes is doing so well. And I think the other thing to say is that I think, again, historically, there's been a slight bias in terms of sort of mainstream schools going, you know, sending students maybe to special schools to do projects and things. And what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that I think there's a lot of practice that happens in special schools and settings, which should be, you know, is far ahead of what goes on in mainstream. For instance, I think creative use of music technology. I think obviously inclusion. So there's a lot of learning that's happening in the arena that I think is very important for mainstream as well. And I think so. I think that investment through the quality framework, I think it'll have that wider impact. Music Hub's always asking, how can this work for mainstream? How can it work for mainstream? So there is that interest and sort of motivation to find out more about it.
I think there are some comments here. I just think it's an interesting. It can be a really powerful kind of outcome from reflective practice. Is actually demonstrating how you are developing your practice in a way that, you know, other people working in other professions don't necessarily do. It's just not kind of woven into practice generally, I don't think. So, you know, I think there's it's reflected in some of the comments, this idea of, you know, really coming together and being able to share some of this becomes, you know, very powerful for people. So, and that's the reason I was picking up on that. So in terms of, there was a question about the curriculum. How can this framework be applied to the new curriculum? What's the answer?
Well, it slightly resembles the point I made earlier, really, that yes, there's a new curriculum, and, you know, when it was being put together, there was quite a lot of, you know, in some cases concern that it felt quite restrictive, and it was using a language that kind of implied that music from a certain time was more important than another, which caused a bit of frustration, I think, for people when it's been put together. On the other hand, what you've got now is a relatively, and, you know, working within a school environment, the levels thing aside, but the curriculum itself is relatively light touch. So I think if there's a workforce that feels like confident to take a leap, as long as they're focusing on the process of creative music making, this framework can help them fulfill the curriculum. Because I think I would personally argue quite strongly for, in terms of young musicians and young people's creativity, that it starts from that point, not trying to shoehorn it into a curriculum. And I know, you know, that sounds like a really idealistic thing to say, but I think for us, that's where it starts. And because the curriculum is relatively light touch in its description, a music coordinator, a head of music, a music coordinator in a special school, if they feel comfortable and confident, can take a leap and turn it into what works best for their setting. I might be being idealistic on that, but I think sometimes it's seen I can't do that because the curriculum tells me I can't. If you look at the curriculum, actually it's not that specific.
I think Matt as well. Just coming in, I think there's a job for music hubs to show even more leadership than they are at the moment. And by that, I'm saying somebody like Martin Fortley, who talks about the curriculum a lot. You know, you're right. The point is that now there's an opportunity without levels to kind of relook at this. And given that there's this window now of opportunity, I think it's really crucial that music education hubs really, get their thinking caps on and understand the issues around this, so that they can go and talk to those schools and they can really support those teachers who often working in isolation. And these teachers, they might be saying things like, I would love to do Sounds of Intent and then my professional development through the quality framework, but the whole school is tied into B squared and P levels, and I'm under pressure and so forth. I think it's really important the hubs understand this really well. They really swat up on this so that they can have those challenging supportive conversations to sort of advocate and say, here's the window of opportunity. We have these products, for want of a better word now. Increasingly, we have the framework, Sounds of Intent, open up orchestras, all these kind of off the shelf, much more off the shelf. We know they're not perfect and that they're not for all time, but they are really strong starting points, which are evidence-based. Quality framework, evidence-based, Sounds of Intent, all these things are being driven by knowledge. So I think, again, I just say, come on, music hubs, here's your chance to sort of set a new path, if you like, as Matt's suggesting.
Driven by knowledge and driven by evidence. We're not just making this up. Do you know what I mean? It's come through from what for us is like 16, 17 years of supporting this work, and the evidence tells us there's these characteristics that can create the environment for really great music making. And it also, hopefully with this framework, is not top down, because it comes from the point of view that the practitioner and the workforce are absolutely central to this, but it does require that very workforce to be quite proactive in making the change in their setting, rather than feel that this is all too difficult, it's been done to them from up high, which I'm sure does happen, and don't get me wrong, but it requires a workforce that's going to step up and go, actually, there is a way we can do this.
So back to let's dive down into detail. Beatrice, I'm just going to read out what she said, just to get your thoughts on this. I do think that as there's no numbering system, is the coloured bar a bit too vague, especially in terms of sharing thoughts with others and looking back on your own work after a longer period of time? I know this ideally would be supported by notes, but realistically there won't always be time for a form to be entirely thoroughly filled in. So what about that? How's that going to pan out? Because that, I presume, is going to be a real issue for people.
I think in terms of that side of things, I mean, there's 23 criteria there that people would be reflecting on their own practice in. And it's not to say that all of those criteria are going to be on an upward trend. They're going to vary from session to session, from circumstance to circumstance. And the whole point is that you're trying to be improving in all of these areas, but that's a continual process. So it's not a question of end game, let's get to 10 on all of these 23 criteria. Your understanding of what is good practice in each one of these criteria will develop over time. So that's kind of, I think, where we're at in terms of actually not having that sort of scored framework side of things, because it is your, I guess, best understanding at that point in time of where you are on those criteria. I think maybe it's helpful to give a little bit of the context as well of where this came from. the research that the Institute of Education did had sort of 3 key findings. One of them was that non-formal music delivery across our portfolio, the sort of youth music funded portfolio that is, was that it was carried out in a specific way that was different from more formal music delivery. But the second finding was that when formal partnerships were formed with non-formal organisations, it was observed to be a positive process for the practitioners and the young people. But in spite of this, there was a lack of joining up between the formal and non-formal provision. And thirdly, that the lack of the joined up working between the formal and the non-formal stemmed from a lack of shared understanding. So in particular, there was a lack of understanding about ways of working and what constitutes quality. So this is from 2011. Since then, we've had the introduction of music education hubs. We've had much bigger sort of partnership working going on. And this is actually where this framework comes into play. It's to enable a dialogue between those formal and non-formal settings. It's enable them to have a conversation in a way that makes sense to both, which is, you know, not reliant on just seeing the practice, but you can talk about aspects of the pedagogy and you can refer actually, you know, what it is you're doing and why that's effective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Jonathan, do you have any?
Could you just recap the question again? Sorry, I lost the.
Sorry, I've.
It's all right.
I'm surrounded by bits of paper.
It crackled for a bit. I didn't get it from.
So Nick, could you just hand the baton back to Jonathan?
Sorry, Nick.
We've got the question is back there from Beatrice. It was about whether the numbering system could be seen as too vague, whether the colour bar rather could be seen as, in terms of actually sharing thoughts with others and reflecting over longer periods of time.
Okay. I think the profiles on these things, it's okay for things to be quite spiky. I think the work, it can be 3 steps forward and then 4 back and 2 forwards again. And I think numbers are useful, engaging things in a fairly concrete way, because I think, you know, writing down observations and thoughts is one thing, but a number can be quite good in terms of an informal way of gauging, you know, where you are at. So I think they can both work. I think
the other thing to suggest there as well, in terms of the sort of you know, numerical, you know, measure of distance travelled, is that it's worth considering whether this is something that might be more appropriate for you and your organisation to be engaging on with other people as well, enabling, you know, a little bit of cross-checking, or ultimately, you know, ideally triangulation between those points, so you can actually have a discussion about, you know, why you've put yourself at what end of the scale, which again, you know, can really unpick what progress you've made. I personally think in much more detail than moving from a 7 to an 8 can.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Nick. Now, I just want to come back to an earlier question quickly. It was from W. Doyle. I'm sorry, I don't know your first name, but I'm going to ask. And I thought it's quite interesting around the emerging practitioners. So are there any learning tools you would recommend to support emerging practitioners to develop their reflective practice so that they can get the most from the framework?
Well, that's an interesting question. It really is, because you're right. The framework is based on the implication that everybody knows what it means to reflect and so forth. And actually, I think that's what the question is, isn't it? I think the question is, if you break that down, what does it mean to be reflective? In terms of tools to support, I don't know if there's any specific sort of tools as such. I think we can help people, we can mentor people about how to talk about their work. Now, I'm going to pick up just a couple of points here. You know, an obvious point is around language. When we spoke at Music Mart, language around disability came up as a really big issue and debate. And, you know, I guess what I'm saying is, for some people coming in new to the work, there are things that people aren't necessarily comfortable about straight away. And and it may take them time. So I think there's a role there about sort of working alongside people and people taking their time to, you know, get used to the setting they're in and the kinds of things. Because it's interesting, somebody said, you know, there's more greater differences between two special schools than between a special school and a mainstream school. So you're right, there are specific things involved there. So for me, when I was learning, it was about having somebody very strong with me to mentor me. And I think working in pairs is another benchmark that I'd always encourage wherever possible. I know that's a workforce issue, but I think it's really important because sessions can be quite hard and difficult quite often for different reasons, and people do need support when those days happen.
So there's Asa, I mean, we're kind of running out of time, and I am going to try and keep us to the hour. What I would do is just say, you know, there's some just really fantastic comments and questions and insights in the chat. So it looks to me like lots of people are just bouncing stuff around, and it looks very, very interesting and useful. So I just looked at this challenge from Asa, you know, reflection is an absolute must here. However, there is another huge point that needs addressing: the massive disconnect between some practitioners, teachers, and technology. You know, what about that, Matt?
Yeah. So, well, okay. The first thing I'd probably say is, you know, often a member of the music education workforce will probably have a specialism that is their thing that they know best. But there'll be other areas of their practice that they might be, you know, less clear about, but they know other people that are really good at something. So I think there's a sort of, firstly, this idea that that workforce, whether it's the music teacher working alongside the music leader practitioner, can learn a lot from each other, and each will have their specialisms. So I would hope that technology, digital, it's kind of here, isn't it? It's obviously here, but I think there has been a struggle for some aspects of music education is seeing it as a cross-cutting theme. I would say digital is cross-cutting. It's the means to which creative music making can happen. So it's the thing that for young people is absolutely kind of at their fingertips. So the workforce needs to really grow with that. So I really like the idea that there's a workforce or a member of that workforce who might say, I don't know about this aspect, but rather than maybe dismiss it, I'm going to find out more from somebody who does. And whether that's Drake, whether that's Open Up, organisations that have specialist skills in music technology, for example, that's what I'd like to see. So I think the disconnect comes sometimes because in music education, there can be all sorts of quite significant generalizations made that actually music technology means this process of making music rather than it be seen as a cross-cutting theme that enables us all. I think that might help. If we can get that across, it might help with some of the disconnect. It's not its own silo, if you see what I mean. It's working well. It should cut across everything that takes place in a creative music making process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's something around the way we talk about music tech as well. I do think it's time we started saying electronic musical instruments rather than music tech. You know, if you walk into a rehearsal for a youth orchestra, you know, you wouldn't expect a drawn-out conversation about the sort of technical merits of the violins and how they're made and how they're produced and so forth. And I think there's still that kind of cloud around music tech. And I think if we can push the argument very firmly onto the music that's produced and the experience had and the expression that is given in someone's hands to express themselves, that's a better dialogue. And I think, you know, Doug Bott's very good writing about this recently. What does music technology sound like, I think was the title of the piece he wrote. And I think part of it is around this, you know, I mean, music tech got its own annex in the national plan famously. Yeah. You know, I think there's still an us and them issue going on here. Not an issue amongst most young people in their everyday lives, clearly, but perhaps amongst professionals in the sector.
Yeah.
I do think, let's talk about instruments and music making, hopefully, as one suggestion there. I'm just very quickly picking up Anita talking about, are we talking SEND students in mainstream or special schools? I think we're talking about both, hopefully. I know there's different issues around both of those settings, but we're including everybody within that.
Great. Now, it feels. Wait a minute. Can you stop seeing my screen? What can you see now? Can someone tell me? Because I've kind of lost something's just happened there.
I think you need to go into full screen. I think that's all.
Yeah. Wait a minute.
Just picking up on Jonathan's point about tech there as well, I think one of the things that there seems to be a further disconnect from in terms of what people are likely to do as professional musicians once they leave school, the type of portfolio career they might be expected to have, the things that they might engage with are going to involve, recording studios, technology. They might involve graphical programming languages. They might involve digital audio workstations in terms of doing sound for film. So there's a huge amount there, which there's sort of, in my mind, seems to be a responsibility to also be at least catering for on some level. So there's a certain responsibility there as well to be engaging with that technology.
So I'm hoping you can see the last screen. Look, it's a great conversation, and in some senses, it feels like we don't want it to end. Everyone's really kind of picking up on some great points and having a conversation. So look, Matt and Jonathan, can I just, based on what you see, can I just give you 2 minutes each just to kind of round up your thinking of what's being said by everyone who's attending tonight, and I'll do a kind of what's next, but what are you picking up from this evening's conversations?
Well, I think firstly, the engagement this evening and people wanting to get involved, by its very nature, is indication to me that people are reflecting on this, which is a great sign. So back to my first point about the big audacious goal towards a musically inclusive England, the workforce being central to that. I'm really heartened by this evening, and also been at other things more recently where these discussions are right centre, they're right in the heart, they're right and centre in the agendas of the Music Mark Conference, etc., with the MEC work. They're not something that's on the kind of periphery. So it indicates to me that actually there is some good progress. I think the key thing now is to turn these kind of positive steps into kind of actions, so that all of us with responsibility in this workforce can take something from tonight and go, I can apply that tomorrow, or I can talk to my head tomorrow about this, whatever that might be, rather than that feeling that somehow we all get stuff done to us. Because actually we've got these resources and this information and this knowledge, which is quite powerful in terms of social musical development of young people, in terms of their outcomes. Yeah. And bottling that this evening, but then doing something about it. It's the kind of high-minded, hard-headed, we've had the good thinking, and then we're hard-headed, we put that into action.
Jonathan, how would you just round up tonight?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I can see the clock there. I think for me, the key word is leadership at the moment.
Yeah.
I think at the moment there is a really big window opening up here, and that it's evidenced by the quality of the discussion tonight and the way people are connecting with each other. And I think it is time that we do start to sort of say, like Matt says, if not now, when? Let's do this. And I think what is really crucial is that we are using these quality tools to help people in that journey. The quality framework, sounds of intent. All these things are starting to come through. Our own Compose and Perform course, for a plug, you know, talking about just stuff that has been thought through and presented, because so many people still come up to me at music conferences, and the questions are very much saying, you know, where do I start? Where can I find this? You know, people are just really hungry for finding the stuff and getting on with the work. And I'm very heartened by that. The difference between when I started 10, 11 years ago and now is very significant. And I think we're on the sort of cusp of a really sort of golden age, actually. I really hope so.
Yeah, and these indicators are really critical for us, you know, both in the work that we do and organisation, in terms of the indicators that demonstrate things are starting to move. And, you know, I don't want to over-egg the pudding, but there's definite indications that they are. But it needs to not be within a special community of people doing this. It needs to be the responsibility of us all around, you know, looking at young people, what makes them tick with their music, and responding really positively to that.
Yeah, and I think picking up on that, I think when we set this session up, we definitely thought, well, what is it? It's the start of something, you know. In actual fact, it's a continuation of something, because you can see by the conversation that, you know, things are happening, and it's hugely positive. And so, coming on to this last slide, you know, really this is the start of something. So what's next is definitely go, if you haven't already downloaded the framework, do that. Have a good look at what that might mean for your practice. But the thing here is, and I think there's a lot of that going on in the chat, but the thing here is, can we go away, do something, and could we come back again? And we've said, right, okay, so 27th of April 2017, we've already committed our calendars to another session, if not before, maybe, but definitely then, to look at how you all might be putting this into practice. So I think that's a really, you know, key part of this, isn't it? It's not just tonight. This is really about kind of connecting that reflection on how it's being used and developed. So, and, you know, dialogue was a big word that was, you know, sorry, a word that's been used a lot tonight. And I think that's what this is about, isn't it? Just continuing that. So we have gone 6 minutes over, but I think, and I also, I needed to plug the fact that there was a MUFU chat on Twitter until 9 o'clock tonight on music education in SEND and your strategies. So if you fancy carrying on the conversation on Twitter, that chat is already there. So I'm just going to say thank you to our speakers, Nick, Matt.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Just to flag up as well, there's a forthcoming event with MEC, Music Education Council, 6th of December, and places are being booked up for that now around, again, similar topics and similar to the issues we talked about tonight. So that's up and running now if people want to book. Great.
Okay, so and we'll send out, you know, this content from tonight and other relevant links after this, and we can put that in as well. So, but lastly, thank you to all of you for attending. Sorry for a couple of technical glitches through there, but hopefully that wasn't too bumpy a ride. It looks like it's been a great conversation. So thank you to all of you for such great participation. It's been really useful, and we will speak to you in the coming days and weeks. We'll send this out, and I'm going to end the session, so it might be a bit abrupt, so it might be a bit of a bumpy landing, but thank you to you all.
Many thanks.
Goodbye.